For that, let's move on to our first keynote speaker. He was Senior Counselor in the Directorate for Education and Skills of the OECD in Paris until May 2021. And currently, he's a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Curriculum Redesign in Boston, USA. It's going to be his first live keynote since the pandemic for a live audience, so he's very, very happy. And his current interests are the science of learning, comparative analysis of education systems, lifelong learning, and higher education policy and evaluation. And obviously, we're all very glad and honored he's here with us today to share his thoughts and his expertise. So may I please have a very warm welcome for Dirk van Damme. Good morning, Dirk. Hello.
Hello.
Great that you're here. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling happy. It's the first time that I've doing this since the pandemic, and it feels strange and it feels so familiar.
I understand completely. Now, you've been in many different positions in higher education during your career. Which one, or maybe what specific experience influenced your thinking the most?
Well, my career has three parts: 15 years academic, 15 years policy making, and 13 years at the OECD. And all three have influenced me, but I would say the most intensive learning experience was at the OECD. When the world opens up, the international experience, the depth of the research, the depth of the knowledge, that was definitely the most influential experience.
Thank you, thank you. Now, since it's EdTech Tuesday today, what is your take on the contribution of EdTech companies to innovation in the public sector?
Oops, that's a long story. That's a difficult thing to do. And I will come back in my keynote on a couple of those questions. But
okay.
I think it's not all positive, but we need the companies. We need EdTech companies. Higher education and education in general cannot innovate without the external partners which play an important role. But there are also partners who don't play a very beautiful role, but it's a mixed answer.
Thank you, thank you. For you online, if you have questions for Dirk, please add them in the chat, and I'll get back to you later for the Q&A.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. I will give you a kind of helicopter view on what is happening in higher education as a consequence of the digital innovation, digitalization in the sector. And I believe, and that's a very short summary of my keynote, digitalization is intensively linked to other developments, and it's not going to break through if these other developments are not taken seriously. So it's a little bit of a macro perspective that I want to give to you to frame what you all are doing in a better context, in a better situation. Let me start by showing this book. I don't know whether people still remember it. It's almost 10 years old, written by Michael Barber, a very famous educational reformer in the UK. An avalanche is coming. And it is a book reflecting on the start of the MOOCs. Coursera was just established, etc. And he said, well, higher education is going to be revolutionized in the next 10 years. In 2013, when the book was published, he said, well, in 10 years' time, higher education will look completely different. And it will be an avalanche coming on at higher education institutions. This has not happened. And a lot of my thinking is, why didn't it not happen? And what is actually happening instead? I think we need to first look at the nature of universities. Universities are very resilient institutions. They do not change easily over time. They require a lot of effort to change. They have a particular relationship with time. And I just show you this very famous quote of Clark Kerr, of 85 institutions in the Western world that have been counted, that still exist since 1520, including Catholic Church, parliaments of the Isle of Man, Iceland and Great Britain, Swiss cantons, and 70 universities. So it gives you an idea of the historical strength, the historical weight in this particular institution, which is the university. So such an institution does not change because of an avalanche of MOOCs, because of poorly videotaped lectures of famous professors being distributed through the internet. That's not going to change the university. Even the term disruption is not accurate to talk about educational innovation as a consequence of the digital times. COVID was a disruption, but that's another story. But the resilience of universities is actually not something that we should look at in negative terms. It's not stubbornness. It is because universities are institutions that change because of reflective processes. They are very careful in changing their primary operational modes. And in itself, that's a good thing because it allows those institutions to weather storms, and there are many storms. Universities have come through the pandemic in rather good shape, and that's because of their resilience. But resistance to change is also real, and that's how we should talk about change in universities. How can we distinguish resilience from resistance? I think that's a very important question. This comes from a rather famous book in education, which I also recommend very much, The Race Between Technology and Education, two Harvard economists, Golden and Katz. And they described over the past 100 years how technology and education have developed alongside each other. And their main thesis is, if education is ahead of economic change, it leads to economic growth, to social progress, to many gains for humanity. When education loses the battle with technology, it leads to poverty, unemployment, social pain. And the question is, what is happening at this moment? Is education losing the battle with technology? Is education losing the race with technology, or are we entering a new time of prosperity because education is capable of catching up and even preceding and anticipating on digitalization? The history of the past 10 years has not been positive. I'm personally rather critical of what happened in educational innovation in higher education over the past 10 years. And to put a very long story in a couple of words, let's start again in 2012, the proclaimed starting date of the MOOCs, more or less. The first 5 years, we have seen an emphasis on digital devices, on connectivity, but with very naive views about the automatic positive effects. It was the age of technological optimism, very simplistic ideas about digital disruption. It was tech-centered instead of pedagogy-centered. The MOOCs are a very good example. I'm personally one of the very critical persons regarding MOOCs, but we can expand on that if necessary. The results of those first 5 years, we see it in the few data that we have been negative. Quality of learning declined because of digital innovation. With regard to the MOOCs, this is evident. There are a lot of studies, excellent studies on the impact of MOOCs. This comes from a rather famous study, and I want you to remember this name, Justin Reich, professor at MIT, one of the great thinkers, who published a kind of sobering account in 2020, maybe 21, I don't remember, Failure to Disrupt. Why technology failed to disrupt higher education. If you read one book that I will mention, read this one. This is just a fascinating story of what happened over the past 10 years. Also at the OECD, we have been monitoring this. This is about 15-year-old, so not exactly higher education. But the more technology 15-year-olds had in their classrooms, the poorer the literacy skills were. More intensive technology use in classrooms was followed by lower literacy rates. And this was quite sobering. These data come from 2015, published in 2017-18, and it was really a little bit of a shock. Also in my community at the OECD, in my center, we didn't really understand why this was happening. As a consequence of these ideas and these findings, and we still are short of excellent data in this, one of the things that I would like to call up this community is, please research what you are doing. Provide the community with reliable data. It's not enough to be enthusiastic, to be innovative, to be just really very driving change. It also is important to evaluate what you are doing, to provide the community, the society, with good data. And often we miss those data. People working on digital innovation are people who like data, but they are doing very poor on researching and evaluating with good data what they are doing. That's a side mark. But it started to change in 2017. A gradual shift in policies and practices, more emphasis on digital skills. We need to train teachers, professors in digital innovation. More emphasis on the pedagogical design, the redesign of learning resources, of curricula, of instructional processes, sophistication of learning platforms, integration of artificial intelligence, etc. That's what you are all doing today, and it's marvelous. It's excellent work. It's much better than what happened in this first phase between 2012 and 2017. But unfortunately, then the pandemic came. And the pandemic disrupted a lot of those processes, but also enabled the system to accelerate. The pandemic was much more important than everything else which happened in digital innovation in the previous years. But we are still coping with the consequences of the pandemic. How can we draw lessons from what we have seen? How can we do better? This is the moment where we are living in today. But digitalization is about much more than all of this. It's not just about tools, processes, skills. It is about transforming the entire production mode of higher education. And that's a really difficult story. So it is not possible, I believe, to do this digital innovation in the current dominant mode of production in higher education, the dominant higher education paradigm. And I will explain that a little bit deeper. We are still living in the paradigm of higher education which was established after the Second World War. And I just name here the most distinctive features of that paradigm. Human capital development for economic growth, massification, credentialism, focusing on degrees, qualifications, oriented towards a qualifications-oriented labor market, social mobility through meritocracy, a front-loaded educational life course, compressing all educational learning in the first 25 years of an individual's lifetime, discipline-focused education for a stable occupational structure. That was the paradigm. It worked well. In the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, it started to become less effective in the years 2000, and it's now becoming increasingly ineffective. The paradigm was not fulfilling its promises. For example, on equality of opportunity, which was the driving idea behind massification. We did not improve equality of opportunity. We just elevated the distribution of learning opportunities. But the gap remained and even increased a little bit. So there are now cracks in this dominant paradigm. Massification is under severe stress. Credentialism is declining. I can tell you a long story about that, but the value of qualifications is rapidly decreasing. Major companies do not longer ask for a qualification acquired at a university. They look at skills. There are concerns about social inequality, about meritocracy. A couple of very critical books have appeared on meritocracy over the past years. Increasingly diverse biographies, which means that the front-loaded educational life course is no longer a good solution for everyone. Discipline-centric education no longer matches what's happening in the science and scientific discoveries, which are happening across or between disciplines. And it's not delivering on the skills demand that is prevalent in the economy today. I will focus on a couple of those points. Higher education qualifications, they had the promise of being a little bit equivalent, certainly in the Bologna space. Bologna was about the idea higher education qualifications in the Bologna space are more or less meaning the same. Well, we know from our data that this is not true. A higher education qualification, a similar one, has a different skills equivalent across countries. And that's really giving a severe blow to the value of higher education qualifications. Higher education qualifications do not protect against low skills. Even in our countries, 5 to 10% of university graduates have not the basic literacy and numeracy skills. Many people are overqualified for the jobs in which they are working. There is a massive process going on the labor market of displacement of middle-educated professionals by higher education professionals, which are actually not in the job that they should be in. So you see this kind of articles in the international press more and more frequently. Does higher education still prepare people for jobs? And of course, the answer in the article is no, it doesn't. As I said, many companies, global companies, do not longer ask for university qualification. There is a famous quote by one of the leading consultancy firms which says, "We don't believe that a university qualification is a good measure for success of an individual." And why are employers saying this? Maybe it's not really very loud in the context of the Netherlands or in Belgium or some of the more advanced, but you hear this rhetoric louder and louder in the international community, which is gathering, for example, in Davos. Employers saying, we don't believe in universities anymore because they are not producing the skills that we are looking for. They are not doing their job. And this is something which should be taken very seriously. And it's not. We are not improving on lifelong learning. Look at where Belgium and the Netherlands are, at the worst part of the chart. We are still only recruiting very young people into our universities. We are not recruiting lifelong learners. We are not offering them value for money. And this comes from a book that I have written and which will be published by the end of June on critical thinking. Are we offering the skills that are important for the economy today? People call them sometimes 21st century skills. I always try to avoid that term because it's so empty. But it's about critical skills, critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication, etc., etc. These are incredibly important. But universities do not deliver them. These are data from 5 countries where we have been able to assess the critical thinking skills of people. I deliberately will not name the countries. It's not the idea to give a ranking of countries, but you see that in some countries there is some learning gain in higher education, in other countries there is not at all. and 50%, half of the exiting students, the graduates, do not possess the critical thinking skills that are needed on the labor market. This comes from, these data are published, so no problem. It's about Finland. You see the learning gain between the first year and the third year bachelor students, which is, yeah, it's meaningful, but it's mediocre. But you also see the big gap between universities and universities of applied sciences. The Finnish government was shocked by these results because, as in the Netherlands, they want to treat universities and universities of applied sciences as almost similar. From a skills perspective, they are not similar. And that's a rather painful experience, rather painful thought. So, what is the new paradigm? It's not a revolutionary paradigm. It's gradually replacing the old paradigm. But the first thing that I would like to stress, the new paradigm of higher education is about skills. This does not mean that knowledge is not important. I think I'm a strong believer in the integration of knowledge and skills. That's a huge debate which is going on. I am for very knowledge-intensive curricula which lead to advanced skills development. But the skills component has to be there. Look at this chart. It's a very famous chart. Probably people have seen it already a couple of times. But the skills demand is changing radically in the labor market and in the economy. We are going to non-routine skills, non-routine interpersonal skills, complex communication skills, and non-routine analytical skills. What do we do in higher education? We still train people for routines, for procedures, for procedural knowledge, for knowing what to do in exactly what situation. We don't train them for uncertainty, for the unexpected, for the non-routine, which is becoming dominant in almost all occupations today. So we are not training people for what's going to be asked from them in their future careers. And the routine cognitive skills are going down very rapidly. Even more recent data show that this decline is going much faster. And as any crisis, also the pandemic has accelerated the transformation of labor markets and skills demand. Routine cognitive labor, for which we train our students, is disappearing. Look at what employers say. This is coming from one of those many surveys about what employers demand from higher education, and the top 10 skills are in that frame. And I would like to stress, mastery of your own field is still important. I'm not arguing against mastery of your own field, but you have to be able to transfer the knowledge and the skills of your own field into other fields. Half of the current working force is working in another occupation than for which he or she has been trained. So these knowledge and skills for which you train people in a discipline-centered education are disappearing rapidly. They are evaporating over a period of less than 10 years. So the half time of discipline, knowledge, and skills is decreasing. Specialized skills are decreasing. This is an interesting chart. Many people believe that the more higher education you have, the more specialized you are. It's exactly the opposite. It's lower educated people who are more specialized or working in more specialized jobs. Higher educated people are working in less professional, less specialized jobs. And they have less specialized skills. They have more generic skills. And this is something that we don't grasp. We always think we have to make it more difficult, more narrow, more focused, more specialized. And this is exactly what we should not do. We should aim for broader, generic, but based on a strong mastery of your own field. And that is the question about innovation of curricula. I think one of the main challenges in digitalization is the curriculum. It's not about tools and processes, it's about the curriculum. What are you trying to bring to your students? What are you expecting your students to learn? Not only how do you want them to learn, it is about the what question. And the what question is becoming incredibly important. The how question is easy. That's a piece of cake. It's the what question which becomes important. How do you develop generic skills in the curriculum? What are interdisciplinary skills? What is real expertise in a context of artificial intelligence? And there is a lot of thinking going on this in the international community, and many people say, well, we have to, maybe you know this, to leave behind the I shape. We have to have the T shape. You have to have mastery in one field, but you have to have the horizontal bar on top of that. And many people say, no, we have to go further. We have to go to an M-shape curriculum, where you have different vertical pillars, and then the horizontal generic element on top of them, the multi-skills profile. This is an interesting debate. This is also an interesting debate. It's about overcoming the old antagonism between knowing and doing, which is intrinsic in our higher education system. It is the main argument why we still divide universities from universities of applied sciences. The question is, how do we develop expertise? How do we develop people who are capable to work in very different environments where non-routine challenges are coming your way all day long? And a final chart on this idea of curriculum reform. On the left, you see the main model of curriculum development in higher education today, based on information, knowledge, understanding. But artificial intelligence is capable of covering almost the entire pyramid. Flipping the classroom is a very popular term in your community. I would like to talk about flipping the curriculum. It is about transfer and expertise. And all below that, I'm not saying that we should forget about it, even if computers can do it as well, but they have to be developed in order to build higher level transfer and expertise, which computers will not be able to do over the time span of 30, 40 years. So, final element of the new paradigm, it's about lifelong learning. And I will not spend a lot of time on this, but it is one of my main preoccupations. Why are we still, from a social and economic point of view, building an education system and maintaining an education system which is completely ineffective with regard to lifelong skills development of people? Compressing everything that people learn in the 21st years, expecting that this is valid for a lifetime, not upgrading, updating this knowledge and these skills during the course of their career, because what we are doing in lifelong learning is just mediocre. I'm not saying it's completely absent, it's just not good enough. So we need to take into account diversification of learning biographies. The standard learning biography is no longer valid for young people. Many young people have very different learning trajectories. And we have a huge economic and social need, and this will intensify in the coming years, for continuously upskilling and reskilling our working population. This is going to be an enormous challenge. For the reasons I have already mentioned, knowledge and skills depreciation, decreasing half-time of qualifications. After 10 years, it is no longer relevant what qualification you have, because that the skills and knowledge equivalent of that qualification has disappeared. I mean, people just use it as a symbol, but it has no intrinsic value anymore after 10 years. So we have to go to new ways of approaching lifelong learning, innovative qualifications, etc. And I do believe, and that's the positive element of my talk, digitalization is necessary to go from the old to the new. It's not a revolution. I don't believe in the word revolution. I don't believe in the word disruption. I would like to ask you to cancel the word disruption. It's used in so many improper terms, so forget about it. It's about change. It's about slow change, difficult change. But digitalization will be necessary to foster the new paradigm, to meet new skills demand, to develop new delivery modes, to rethink the curriculum, to develop new credentials, and you all know about micro-credentials and digital badges, and et cetera, about lifelong learning, flexible pathways, and new higher education landscapes. I do believe that higher education is changing profoundly. Universities are resilient, but they are capable of changing. It's not that they are completely resistant to change, but it will take time, it will take effort, and that's why the work of your community is so important. So, as a conclusion, I don't expect a revolution. I don't expect disruption. It's about the slow growth of the new in the old, with a lot of tensions, contradictions, but continuously endless change. Thank you so much for your attention.
So thank you, Dirk. Slow is the word.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have some time for a Q&A. So this is your time. Yes. Please speak up in the catch box as if you're taking a sip out of something. Yeah? Hi. Yeah, I'm going. Hi, who are you?
Hi, Danica Marquis from TU Delft, as particularly part of the Extension School for Continuing Education. Thank you for your talk. It was really great, and I really, really enjoyed your conclusion specifically. I am curious, though, because we build a lot of MOOCs. We're really good at building MOOCs. And your conclusions, the start you sort of said you didn't feel that MOOCs were a suitable way to do that, but then compared it to 15-year-olds. We don't actually teach MOOCs to 15-year-olds. What we do is use them for lifelong learning. And so in your talk, do you not think that we could use MOOCs to help create continuous education, lifelong learning in the way that we are actually seeing that we have data to support?
Yeah, good question. I have been very critical about MOOCs, but of course this was more related to the first 5-7 years of MOOCs. I was just devastated to see poorly recorded videotapes of professors, and so there are many disadvantages to MOOC. But the more recent developments are very positive. What Future Learn is doing in the UK, what you are doing in Delft, this is just excellent work. So, but I would not call them MOOCs any longer. I would like to see a new name emerging for those resources, but it's because it is about digital resources. It's about preferably open educational resources in all kinds of shapes and forms. The whole idea about MOOCs, I'm not a believer in it, for many reasons. On a global perspective, the language issues are just detrimental. The access of disempowered populations in Africa and Asia to MOOCs is still... so people had very naive ideas about the impact and the potential disruption caused by MOOCs. It did not happen and it will not happen. But digital resources of all kinds, well developed, with instructional design based on the learning sciences, this is absolutely the future. So what you are doing is perfect, but for me the term MOOCs has become too ugly.
What would be a different word then?
Well, I very much like the term open educational resources, OERs. It is, and it adds the value of openness, of licensing, etc. So I'm a big fan of OERs, And I think if we could promote the term OERs and replace the term MOOCs, that would be something beautiful.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. Next question, please.
Hi, hello.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No? Okay. Hi, it's Che Govender from Hotel School The Hague, VR and AR. Good morning, Dirk. Thank you for the lovely talk. I thought it was very expansive and broad, and touched on some of the major problems facing higher education today. I wanted to find out or comment about a book called Future Shock, Alvin Toffler, and he spoke about the future illiterate being people who did not know how to learn, and who would need to learn how to learn in order to be competitive in the future economy. My question is, a lot of your talk was on skills and lifelong learning and the importance of that. Why are universities not teaching students how to learn? Why are we still teaching content when all the content is online? So, you know, how do we see this revolution in education come through? And my second question, if that's okay, is...
well, but let's start with this question first.
Yeah. I'm afraid I disagree fundamentally. I will not use the word learning to learn, because I think it's empty. You learn through content. Even if the ultimate goal of learning is skills development. But the content is important. I don't take the argument of my former boss, Andreas Schleicher, everything is in Google, so you don't need to learn it. You need to learn it. You need to learn the fundamental basics of the knowledge in order to navigate in a knowledge-intensive world, and especially on the internet. So the concept of learning to learn, devoid of content, is for me, as an educationalist, not acceptable. The point, well, you refer to Alvin Toffler and others like Ivan Illich, they were far too naive about the individual capabilities of learning. I do believe that learning emerges from the interaction between a teacher and the institutional environment and the learner. I'm not a fan of personalized learning, I must say, because it's purely individualistic. Learning is a social process happening in the encounter between a teacher and a learner in an institutional context, fed by content and leading to skills. But it's not the individual learning to learn perspective that those apologists are advocating.
Thank you, Dirk. Thank you for your question. I want to give others the opportunity as well. And after that side, let's move over to that side with the catch
That's a
box.
pity. I was just excited for my question.
Yes, you can. No. I said the last one
right.
from this side.
Dirk, I very much enjoyed your presentation. You're using a lot of OECD data, which I find insightful. But for me, there's a bit of a contradiction in what the OECD does and says. And one of the slides, you're representing that as well. I'm, by the way, Maurice, and I'm on behalf of my... as a concerned parent, most of it. That's why I'm here. They are 5 and 6 years old, by the way, so I have some time still. But my point was, the critical thinking skill, you find it more important, but then you don't want to publish the ranking. But on the other hand, you're publishing rankings that are kind of old-fashioned, like PISA scores. And that, for me, is a bit of a contradiction, because you want to change, you want to make the change happening within the OECD, but you're not publishing those data. So if you want to change and you inspire regulators, policymakers for change, why are you still using outdated rankings like PISA scores and not new skill sets like the one you were mentioning, critical thinking?
Yeah, that's actually a question about PISA and the future of PISA. And of course I have my ideas. First of all, about the OECD. What I like about the OECD is I experienced more freedom of thinking in the OECD than I experienced in a university. I was able to develop new ideas and start discussing it with colleagues, etc., which I was not able to do in academia, where I was competing with all the rest, focusing on getting my articles published, etc. So for me, the OECD was a liberating experience. It also means that not everyone at the OECD thinks the same way. we have profound differences of views. Even if people say the OECD is advocating for a neoliberal world, all the bullshit. So we did have our disagreements, and I have different views about the future of PISA than my former boss, Andreas Schleich. That's not a problem at all. We are perfectly able to discuss that even in public. PISA is going through a profound process of rethinking. This is actually happening. There's a very interesting report published yesterday by the National Center for Economy and Education in the United States on how to move forward PISA. So this is going on. Should we still focus on literacy and numeracy skills and on science literacy? Many people say yes, because these are the foundations. This is about foundational knowledge, and I agree with that. The ranking is another issue. Why did I not publish the ranking of those 6 countries in my book? Because the sampling procedures were not perfect. We don't have samples, except for Finland, which are representative of the country. So we don't want to name and blame and shame the country. We just have data from 100,000 students on an institutional level, which are living in those countries. But that's the main point. But the future of PISA is a fascinating debate, and it will continue over the next years, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. One more question. It's time for one more question. Right at the back here in the middle row. Maybe you can stand up. Ooh. Oh, I thought it was for that. Sorry. Sorry. Oh. Well, depending on how complicated the question is.
Hi, I feel very bad right now. Sorry.
No.
My name is Esther. I'm from the Vrije Universiteit, lecturer. Thank you for the inspiring talk. What is your vision on who is going to teach those skills? Because there are some discussions about who is going to be hired. Are teachers who don't have a PhD actually the right people to stay at university? There is a shift going, I think, also in education at or in hiring teachers. I would like to hear your vision on that.
Thank you.
That's a difficult one, because I don't have a very clear, pronounced view myself. I'm following these debates. I'm looking rather enthusiastic to the whole debate about anders waarderen, etc. So, and I think it's a much needed debate. We have been pushing for a completely one-dimensional view of higher education development and higher education staffing. But at the same time, I don't believe that this is really a critically important element. I believe in high-quality teachers. I'm not sure that a PhD is always necessary, but it is advancing the higher order analytical thinking skills that people have. I think everyone with a PhD will say or will confirm that this was one of the most intensive personal learning experiences of a lifetime. The years that I have been working on a PhD allowed me to develop really my analytical thinking skills, to not comparable to any other learning experience. So I'm not devaluing the PhD, and maybe there are other ways of developing the analytical skills that people need to have, but I do believe that university professors, in general, generic, should have very highly developed analytical skills, should be highly developed communication skills. So the skills requirements for that kind of teachers are very, very important. It is probably not necessary to have them all at the start of a career. Continuous professional development is still something very poorly developed in higher education. So there is a lot to say about your question, but apart from these very general answers, I don't have a very pronounced view.
Okay.
Well, hopefully.
Thank you.
Oh.
It's not a Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I feel there's much more questions. Are you here for the rest of the day?
I'm here till noon, a little bit later than noon, but at
Okay.
lunchtime I'm here.
So people can come
Yeah.
come and speak to you if they want to, if you have any more questions. For now, thank you so much, Dirk van Damme. Thank you.